I don't start off many videos with an apology in advance, but this is probably gonna be one of those videos. So I'm sorry in advance. I wish I was making this up. Did I get punked? If you're a woman who hates herself, this book is perfect for you. You need to pay my therapy bill, babe. Hello everyone, welcome back to my vlog channel. Today I'm going to be doing an in-depth dive into the worst books that I read this year. This year was my first year back into reading heavily, probably since like late middle school. I graduated college earlier this year and my New Year's resolution was to read for entertainment again. Throughout high school and college, I had read so many things required for school that it kind of took the joy out of reading for a bit, and I really wanted to strive and get back to that original place where reading was something that I loved doing. And it's safe to say that I did definitely accomplish that this year, but that's not without some struggle. And every book I'm gonna talk about in today's video came with a lot of fucking struggle. I am going to be doing a video where I talk about my favorite books that I read this year, but I figured why not start things off on a bad note and talk about the books that made me want to gouge my eye out. Yay! I also want to mention that these books were not necessarily published in 2022, they were just a book that I read within the year of 2022, regardless of publishing date. We're just gonna go ahead and get into it. Insert your typical disclaimer here about how these are just my opinions, that quote about how like opinions are assholes and everyone has one, and also just in general, I am an asshole, I'm a critical hater, and if I shit on your favorite book, please do not take it personally. Reading tastes and reading enjoyment is so personal. These are just books that I personally wish I never had to experience and would not recommend. These are gonna be in no particular order because honestly, I hated all of these books somewhat equally, but for different reasons. And the first book that I'm gonna talk about today that I really just did not enjoy reading and do not understand the hype for is Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Oh my god, this book. It's a book that I think about a lot, but not in the sense of like, wow, that was really good. It sparked these conversations within me. I think back to it in almost a sense of, what the fuck was that? I did do a reading vlog for this, so if you want to see all of my reactions throughout reading this, you can check out that video. I will put it somewhere up here in the cards. I do have reading vlogs for a few of these books, so anytime that there is a reading vlog, it'll pop up at the top of the screen, so keep an eye out. But this book follows our main characters, Tate and Miles, as they embark on a friends with benefits situationship. Tate eventually starts to develop real feelings for Miles, but when they embarked on this relationship, Miles gave Tate two rules to follow. Never ask about the past and don't expect a future. Miles is very closed off, he is a grade A brooding asshole. Tate loves his D so much, she wants to know what's going on in his brain. God really gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, because I'll be damned if I'm gonna spend the amount of time that Tate did dealing with a closed-off, emotional, sexually deviant asshole like Miles. This book's also told in dual timeline and dual perspective, so you have half of the book in present-day chapters in Tate's perspective, and then half of the book in the past chapters from Miles' perspective, written in a very 2012 Tumblr stanza-esque format where he's reminiscing on his like first true love, which was with a girl named Rachel, who was also his stepsister. Yeah, bet the book talk girlies that recommended this just conveniently forgot to mention that. Yeah, there is a bit of a step-sibling romance. I don't understand, one, how anyone enjoyed this book, but two, how anyone even shipped Tate and Miles together. Miles is one of those male love interests that just needed to go to fucking therapy, and everything could have been solved. But no, instead, he decides to spend 6-7 years of his life just being a miserable black hole of a human being and then whirling Tate up into his mess without any regard for her feelings. And some people might just pass off the bad plot because the smut is great, but in this book, that still doesn't work for me because there is a legitimate sex scene in this book. Miles proceeds to have sex with Tate without a condom, without ever talking about it, asking her. There's no real consent here. They have sex without a condom, and then immediately afterwards, he pulls out, walks out the apartment, and slams the door in her face. So, yeah, just that real romantic grade A smut that everyone's looking for. There was a bunch of weird discourse about circumcision in here. I'm just going to show you this screenshot from a actual page in this book. These are actual words that Colleen Hoover wrote and proceeded to publish, and I'll just let that do the talking for me. How anyone could read that paragraph and rate this book 5 stars is a phenomenon that needs to be studied, and I'm going to talk about the big plot twist and spoiler. So if you haven't read this and somehow you want to torture yourself and put yourself through it, skip to the time on the screen, because he had a baby with his stepsister, Rachel, okay? And on the way home from the hospital, Rachel and him are talking about how big their son's balls are, as you saw in the previous screenshot. And because this conversation regarding the size of his not even 5-day-old baby's balls is so important and so consuming, Miles is not paying attention. He I can't even say it. He drives their car into a lake, and then the baby drowns and dies. Now, I'm not here to say that car accidents and deaths of children are not sad and unfortunate and tragic. I just couldn't personally get over the fact that the whole reason that they crashed was because of a conversation about balls. Essentially, this book was balls to the wall bad. The next book that I just did not enjoy this year was Funny You Should Ask by Elisa Sussman. When this came out and was going around doing its rounds on the internet and was popping off, I was so excited because, one, the cover is stunning, and it is a One of Us is Famous romance trope, and from my old fanfiction days, I love a good famous romance. This follows a reporter named Chani, I believe is how you pronounce her name, and she is tasked with interviewing basically her biggest celebrity crush, a man named Gabe. And this interview kind of goes viral. They spend a heated weekend together while this interview is partaking, and then they basically never see each other again because Gabe gets engaged to like another famous actress. And then 10 years later, they want Chani to re-interview him as a kind of like throwback piece. So you're getting both timelines. And honestly, the writing in this book wasn't bad. The plot isn't a terrible concept. But for me, this was the least romantic romance I have ever fucking read in my life. I have never felt so bored and felt so little chemistry between two characters. Gabe was the most bland, 2% milk ass male love interest that I've ever come across. Like, I literally can't think of one thing about this man that was interesting. I know he had a dog and that he was kind of an asshole, but not in like a fun enemies to lovers way, in just like a, why the fuck would you say that to me kind of way. I also did not understand how these two managed to have like these crazy intense feelings for each other over the course of like 2 days. There was no romantic tension. There was no genuine connection. This book just felt like an empty shell of what a book is actually supposed to be. Again, the writing wasn't awful, and the concept was sort of there, and the cover is surely doing something to me. But despite this, this was the most boring book I read this year. Funny you should ask. Actually, I wish I never did. The next book we're gonna talk about, if you're a fan of my channel, you would know that me and this book have beef. Actual one-sided beef. We have a feud going on. She's just not aware of it yet. This is another one that I did a full reaction reading vlog review. So, there's a whole video going into depth about why this was so awful if you want to check it out, but I'll keep it short and simple. This book initially began as a Wattpad fanfiction about Harry Styles, but when it got adapted into an actual published novel, they changed Harry into Hardin. So it follows our two main characters, Hardin, who is just a British, abusive, toxic piece of shit with no job, no future, no interests, and a general enjoyment of just making everyone around him miserable. And then Tessa, our pure, innocent, goody two-shoes, I'm not like other girls, mega slut shamer 3000. And look, I'm not here to shit on books that initially started as fanfiction. As I mentioned earlier, I used to be really deep in the fan fiction scene. Back when I was in middle school, I was all over Justin Bieber fan fiction archive, okay? I read Danger by Jiley Overboard, and I will never forget it. But Anna Todd truly conjured up something maniacal with this. It saddens me to think that so many young and impressionable teenage girls read this and were obsessed with it, because this is probably the most toxic relationship that I've read about this year that is played off to be as like relationship goals, you know? This actually should be classified as a dark romance. Despite this book already being about 300 pages too long, all this book contains is Tessa and Hardin fighting, then fucking, then fighting, then fucking, then fighting, then fucking, then fighting, then fucking. With the most mediocre writing to ever exist.
You want to suck my cock, Tessa?
I think that the bloody sheets in this book will haunt me till the day I die. Anna Todd, you need to pay my therapy bill, babe. Now, the next book that I'm gonna talk about is the last one on this list that I have in physical copy. If I really don't like a book, I don't tend to like keep the physical edition, so most of the ones we're gonna talk about in this video are on my Kindle. Now, I will say that this is probably the best written book on this entire list. I don't actually think that the writing is awful. It was just so hyped and I was very excited to read it, and then thus it became the most disappointing book that I read. And that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Again, I have a reading vlog for this. I'm currently doing reading vlogs for every book in the series, and I am on the third book right now. And I actually do enjoy the second and third book in this series. Man, this first book, whew, was so disappointing. It follows a human girl named Feyre, and she lives in this world where it's basically split between Prythian, which is this fairy realm, and then the human realm, and they're divided by this big wall because there was this big war, yada yada yada. World building backstory that you don't care about. Feyre is this Katniss Everdeen wannabe. She's like the hunter and provider for her family, and one day when she's out in the woods, she kills a fairy wolf. And because of that, this evil fairy monster guy named Tamlin shows up and whisks her away to Prythian in the fairy realm and keeps her hostage there. This book is basically their romance, if you want to call it that. If you're familiar with this series, the love interest does not stay the same throughout the entire series, and I actually definitely prefer the real love interest that comes in more in the second book. But for this book, you're mostly focusing on Feyre and Tamlin, and oh my god, I hate Tamlin so much. Like, I just hate both of them so much, especially in this book. I will say Feyre gets a lot more likable through the rest of the series, but in this first book, she was so inconsistent, so indecisive, and I never really truly understood her motives or intentions for anything that she did. I also really don't love how gendered Sarah J. Maas's stories are, at least in this series. I haven't read any of her other series, but throughout this series, there's so much talk about like fated mates and mating bonds and female and males, and how males claim their female mates and they own them and possess them. It's just too much. If you're interested in reading this series and you haven't yet, honestly, I would recommend watching Carrie Can Read break down this entire book in her video that she posted, and then just immediately jumping into the second book, because this one, I just really don't think is worth your time. Feyre in this book is my 13th reason, honestly. The next book we're gonna talk about is another really popular book that I actually was recommended by one of my close friends. Hi, if you're watching this, don't worry, I still love you, but I definitely hated this book. That is The Deal by Elle Kennedy. Our main characters are named Hannah and Garrett. Garrett's a hockey player. Hannah is like a smart student at this college. They go to the same school, they're in the same class, and Hannah's the only one that passes this exam in one of their classes that she shares with Garrett, and Garrett needs to keep his grades up to stay on the hockey team. So he basically forces Hannah to tutor him. Like, she tells him no so many times, and he just will not take it for an answer. So many people love this series that when I was reading it, I remember sitting there being like, did I get punked? Like, did I get an alternate version of this book on my Kindle? Because I just did not enjoy it. First of all, I DNF'd this at like 75%. I could not even bring myself to finish it because that's how much I just was not enjoying it. And that's for two main reasons. One, the writing in this book was just lazy. That's the only way that I can describe it, is laziness. For example, there's a big scene towards the beginning of the book where one night they're at Garrett's house having a tutoring session, and once they finish, they decide, oh, let's order some pizza and watch Breaking Bad. And I love Breaking Bad. It's one of my, if not my favorite show of all time. And so I was like, hell yeah, let's go. They managed to watch the entirety of season 1 in like less than 5 hours. And that's including the time that they paused to order their pizza. If you do the actual math, which by the way, took me less than 3 minutes to figure out, this is actually how long it would take to watch the entirety of the first season of Breaking Bad from start to finish, all the way through without stopping. And it's just basic shit like this that continuously comes up, where it's like, if Elle Kennedy would have just taken 3 minutes out of her day to research something real quick, then the timing of this book would have actually made sense. I wasn't aware that this was a fantasy novel and we could time travel. My bad. Were y'all watching it on like 3 times speed? The second reason why I really just did not like this book was our love interest Garrett is not the feminist icon that book talk claims that he is. The first second he actually meets Hannah, he immediately starts thinking about how
Big and nice her ass is.
he calls her stripper tits in a totally non-endearing way. At one point they're going to a party and he shits on Hannah for her outfit and encourages her to change into something more revealing. He steals Hannah's phone and deletes all of the One Direction music off of it because that's apparently not real music. He's just your traditional misogynistic asshole. And I feel like Garrett, for some reason, gets a pass amongst the TikTok girlies because Hannah is struggling with not being able to orgasm during sex because of previous stuff that she had been through. And Garrett definitely helps her through that. And once they form an emotional bond, he does kind of become a little bit better of a guy. But for me, respecting a woman during sex and doing things at her pace is the bare fucking minimum. And also, only respecting women when you are attracted to them or when you're romantically invested in them is not respecting women. Try respecting women regardless of your attraction to them challenge. Impossible for Garrett Graham. While we're keeping on the romance theme, next is a romance that I picked up on Kindle. This is on Kindle Unlimited. It is Dirty Letters. I forget the authors. There's 2 authors. It'll be on the screen. Now, this book overall was just a traditional, easy breezy, run-of-the-mill romance between the 2 main characters. I don't even remember their names, and I'm not gonna try to remember them. The 2 main characters are actually pen pals, and they have been since they were younger, but the guy actually becomes famous and the woman is not. So that was kind of like a fun dynamic. It felt very fan fiction-y to me, but not in a bad way necessarily. For the most part, this book was just very average and kind of forgettable. But the reason that it made it on this list is for something very specific that will traumatize me till the day I die. I don't understand how not only 1, but 2 authors decided to use Furbies as a sexual plot device in this book. I don't remember all the details exactly off the top of my head, but apparently the main love interest had a Furby keychain when she was little, and she used to use it to masturbate. So in a sort of romantic gesture, the male love interest has an entire box full of these Furby keychains sent to the woman's door, and she continuously throughout the novel uses these Furby keychains during sexual acts. I wish I was making this up. Not only are they a children's toy, so that's just strange on its own, but Furbies in general are the least sexy thing that I think has ever existed, and now I will never be able to look at them the same again. So, thanks. Thanks for that, Dirty Letters. Next book that just was, oh my god, completely awful, was Lilac by B.B. Reed. I was very excited when I downloaded this book because this was my first ever Why Choose reverse harem romance. It is about this band, and there is initially 4 guys in this band, but one of them actually passes away, and so the main character, the female in the story, she takes his place and joins this band with this these three guys, and they hate her. But slowly throughout the novel, she becomes romantically and sexually involved with all three members of the band. I'm not gonna lie, some of the smut was actually pretty good in this book, but for me, what ruined it caused me to not even be able to finish it and just be absolutely baffled that people were recommending this, was the blatant misogyny and sexism from all three of our male lead love interests. I could sit here and try to explain why this bothered me, but instead I'm just gonna insert this clip of me reading a few of the things that these men say, and I'll let them speak for themselves.
Page 56.
I couldn't deny my sexism, so I ignored it instead.
Page 69.
There's more to life than just sex. You sound like a fucking virgin.
Page 122.
This conversation is coming dangerously close to sexist, asshole. I chuckled in response because I genuinely didn't give a shit.
Page 164.
You're definitely not marriage material. Men like meat, and girls who like meat.
And page 166.
If you're looking for someone to be good to you when he's not inside of you, I'm not your guy.
And somehow, BB Reed thought that I would read these sentences and be rooting for these main love interest men? That is delusion. It's 2022. Can we leave the misogynistic, gross male behavior back in the fucking past, please? If a man said anything remotely close to those things to me, I would probably go to prison. If you're a woman who hates herself, this book is perfect for you. Definitely the worst love interest I read about this year. Honestly, Hardin is better than these men. And the last book I'm gonna be talking about today, not really saving the best for last, but regardless, it is The Selection by Kiera Cass. This was published, I think in like 2011, 2012, and it was really popular during that time, during that YA dystopian era. I never read it in middle school, and granted, if I did read it in middle school, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more than I did reading it this year. This book was just mediocre in every single sense. It was as if Kiera Cass watched one season of The Bachelor and read the first Divergent book and was like, hey, I've got an idea. It felt poorly planned, poorly executed, poorly written, and overall just underwhelming. Our main character is named America's Singer because she's American and her family are all singers. She gets invited to go into this like basically dating fiasco with the prince of this futuristic kingdom named Maxon, where she is competing against like 30 other young girls to become the princess. The I'm not like other girls energy is really strong in this one, but honestly, given the time period, it wasn't that shocking. Like, that's not really what I hated the most about it. What I hated the most about this book was that this book is the master class of telling instead of showing. I feel like you take any writing class in high school or college, and one of the first things you learn is to show your audience what your characters are like, what the plot is, anything in your story, to show them rather than tell them explicitly. This book is a perfect example of what not to do when it comes to storytelling. So much of the plot, of the character's backstory, of the world building was just poured out to you in paragraphs of explanation rather than scenes and dialogue. But I understand why an 11 or 12-year-old wouldn't necessarily care about the poor writing and how this could be a comfort read for people. But for me, reading it as a 22-year-old, it did not work. And also, the love triangle in this book is just so boring. This book is the LaCroix of books. You think there's gonna be a fun dystopian world, plot twists, tension, romance, but in reality, it's like the faintest hint of that. And that concludes my worst books of 2022 video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope your experience watching this video was more enjoyable than my experience was reading any of these books. I'd love to know what your least favorite books of this year were in the comments. Please feel free to share. I love shit-talking books. I'm sorry.
It's me. I am the problem, it's me.
Again, please remember to take my opinions with a grain of salt. Read what you love. For me, that will just be none of these books ever again. I will see you all very soon for my favorite books of the year video, but in the meantime, I'm sending you lots of love and light, and I hope you have a great day or a great night, wherever you are. Bye.